Hello, I'm Michael Opitz, your host, and I want to welcome you to our second Internet radio broadcast. Our show today includes my special guest host, Christina Jeffrey, Ph.D. Political Science, former House historian, and college professor. Jack Smith, the chair of the North Georgia Tea Party Alliance, will be joining us shortly. He has assembled a busload of concerned citizens, and they have been in Washington, D.C. all day long talking with senators and congressional leaders, congressional representatives, I should say, and we're looking forward to his report. Also, James Strawn will join us later. He is an IT consultant and solutions architect with decades of experience working on various projects within Fortune 500 companies. He's also an author and editor for DecidingTheVote.com, a blog forum for politically active citizens and professionals. James is also the technical producer for the show and social media consultant. He'll be joining us to discuss issues at large. We're all just citizens who are supported by a network of people who share information and stories that provide insight that's not offered by the big media. And this show is about sharing that information with a perspective of accurate facts and truth. Hi, Christina.
Hello, Michael.
How are you today?
Marvelous.
Wonderful. We've got a lot of topics to cover in a short time, so if I may just jump into this, the two topics that we have before Jack Smith joins us are Syria, and then we're going to talk about Obamacare, and that vote is pending, and there are lots of issues with that vote. But let's talk about Syria and the nations, the global nations, why we should intervene or why we shouldn't intervene if there is a historical legal precedent, and I think you've done some research on this.
Well, yes. You and I were talking, and I was reminded of something that I studied in graduate school, in international affairs courses, and that was the meaning of sovereignty. Sovereignty is very important. If you're not a sovereign nation, well, then anybody can come plant their flag and take you over. That's kind of how the English got here in the first place. So, but I wasn't exactly sure when that aspect of the law of nations really exactly when it started. And so my research was to find out. And what I found was that at the end of the 30 Years' War, where the carnage was just horrible.
Christina,
you may
want to, yes, you may want to tell our listeners what the 30 Years' War was.
Well, the 30 Years' War went on primarily in England. You know, I'm a political scientist, and my experience goes back to 1960. But the kings and the nobles were carried it on forever. It was between the Catholics and the Protestants. Cromwell was involved, and it ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. And what they tried to do in a series of treaties was to establish an international law that no nation could invade another nation in order to convert the population to their religion, that the internal affairs of another nation were an internal matter. And so it was among civilized nations until, believe it or not, Kosovo.
Really?
The Bosnian War in 1994, right?
Yeah.
That was the precedent for interfering with another nation in order to prevent it from doing things that we disapprove of, slaughtering its, ethnic cleansing in that case.
Well, at that time,
that was Bill Clinton's war.
Yeah, and at that time, although we didn't know much about it, and they used the phrase ethnic cleansing, But in retrospect, it really seems that they were engaged in a civil strife between Muslims and Christians, as we would look at how that's being framed today. So
well, and we came in on the side of the Muslims, and some of the people that we were fighting had actually served in wars on our side. They were pretty old generals, but they were some of our old allies. The next time that we did this was 2011, the Libyan Civil War, and we came in on the side of the rebels against Gaddafi. We violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the Peace of Westphalia just a few months ago in threatening to punish Egypt in the wake of the Egyptian army ousting the Muslim Brotherhood government. Now, that's
and
that
had been the standard global law among nations for the past 400 to 600 years.
Well, it's kind of ironic, it seems to me, that these are Democrat presidents flaunting the law of nations. We're always being told that we're too isolationist, that we don't respect other nations. International peace accords are the way to peace, justice, and harmony in the world, and yet it's not Republicans that have flouted this. Now, it's tough. It's a tough standard when you see things that are just horrific going on, but it does cut down on wars, and that was the purpose of the Peace of Westphalia.
Well, I remember when I was in college, the mantra then was that we are not the world's policemen. We can't afford it, and we can't afford to get involved. And Thomas Jefferson said it well: avoid foreign entanglements, no matter how much we want to rescue folks who are at the receiving end of the punishment. But
I don't know. I'm not sure that I think Jefferson came around to thinking that, but that was actually Washington who, in his farewell address, he cautioned us against foreign entanglements.
You're absolutely right.
Jefferson, he was siding with the Republican Democrats of his age. He was really the founder of that party, and wanted us to be on the side of France. So he came around to thinking that was a bad idea, especially once he was president. But when he was Secretary of State, he was very concerned that we might go to war on the side of England, and so therefore he was pushing in the other direction. But he had not come to the conclusion that avoiding entangling alliances was a seriously bad thing, I don't think, until he was president.
Well, as we see, the history of foreign intervention goes back to before our founding of our country and even earlier. And if we can turn our attention now to Obamacare, and Jack Smith's going to be on shortly. And Jack is the chair of the North Georgia Tea Party Alliance. And he's assembled a busload of concerned citizens, and they've been in Washington all day talking with senators and congressional representatives about Obamacare and defunding Obamacare, and we're looking forward to his report. But just a little bit of background on Obamacare. We know that this was a hard-fought legislation in both the House and the Senate, and as I recall, no Republicans voted for Obamacare, as it is popularly called.
That is correct. Zero.
The Affordable Health Care Act. And
then it went to not affordable and not very healthy.
No, not affordable at all. It was supposed to reduce costs by $2,500 per year per person, and that didn't happen. So anyway, it then went to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The $2,500 is probably accurate, but it was increased by $2,500.
That's right. Even though we were told it was going to be reduced by $2,400.
We misunderstood.
I know, our fault. And then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in a surprise ruling, the deciding vote was the Chief Justice, whom everybody thought was had a conservative view and interpretation of the Constitution. But what he ruled on is, and that's Chief Justice John Roberts. What he ruled on is that it is constitutional for the government to pass a tax on inactivity. So if you don't buy something, then you have to pay a tax. If you don't engage in a certain activity, you must pay a tax. And that was the strangest ruling, I think, in the history of the Supreme Court, but you may know of something stranger.
Well, I was just reading a portion of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America about administrative centralization. This might actually have been in the material leading up to it. Tocqueville says that people in France think that America has no government centralization at all. The place is the Wild West. He says actually the government centralization is very, very strong, and the danger for that democracy comes not from disorder, but from the strength of the government centralization. And I had read that before and thought he's just exaggerating for effect. He's making this point to his French countrymen. And then I thought about Obamacare and Common Core, which is Obamacare for education. There's no education in it. Ooh, I think Jack has arrived.
Well, we're very glad you're with us, and I have already introduced you to the folks and given your credentials and what you're doing up there. And there are a lot of us who could not be with you, but we're really proud that you're representing Georgia and carrying the message to the congressmen and the senators. We have on with us Jack Christina Jeffrey, Ph.D. political science and former House historian. But we'll give you the lead if you'll give us a recap on what's happened today. I'm sure there has been a lot of excitement on the positive and the negative side, but we're anxious to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, it really wasn't. I don't have any real negative to report. There's a struggle going on within the Republican caucus in the House, and the leadership has proposed a two-pronged bill, as you are aware of, that is not going to fly. And the next 48 hours is going to be very critical as to whether or not this moves forward and we can get defunding passed on to the Senate.
Jack, if you would explain to the listeners who are not familiar with the two-pronged bill and the Republicans' approach, because a lot of people who do know about it are not happy at all with that direction. But please help the listeners understand the dynamics of that.
We're not happy because if they vote on the one part of it, then they can come home and say that they voted to defund it, but it allows them to move forward with it. And the other is just a straight defunding.
So they're playing, it looks as if they're being very disingenuous.
Yes,
and,
they're playing the game.
And trying to fool us so they can come back. We've seen it happen over and over that they say, yeah, I voted for it before I voted against it.
That's true. Very true.
And so then, therefore, as I understand, all of those congressmen, members of the House who vote for this, is actually trying to provide cover for themselves. So they should be voting against this.
That is correct. Those that voted against it, they should stand fast, and I believe that you'll see that happen.
Do you have any names of congressmen who are voting against this duplicitous legislation?
Yeah, Collins is one of them, and I know that Paul Brown will be one of them, and Gingrey will be one of them, and Tom Price, my understanding, is going to be. That's the understanding that I have at the present time.
But we'll wait to confirm that. There are a couple that you have just mentioned that I'm sure are good to their word, but then there are a couple that we have questions on. So
yeah, and I think Michelle Bachmann will be against it as well.
Wonderful. She's an excellent representative. What else can you share with us, Jack?
Well, the crowd was very enthusiastic, as you would expect. There was about 6,000 of us. It was extremely hot. The sun was bearing down, and it was a great day in Washington. Groups of us went through the Senate office building and went into many senators' offices and made our position clear that we do not want any additional funding for Obamacare. And the same in the House. The people went to various offices and were able to talk to various congressmen and senators and take the message that Georgians are opposed to any funding for Obamacare. We were received very graciously, and they recorded our remarks, and it was very pleasant.
Good. Why do you think that there are a number of Republicans who are voting for this legislation to fool us, and even though they've campaigned against Obamacare, and we have believed them, but we have seen delay after delay after delay of stopping the funding for Obamacare. They may vote to repeal it, but they haven't voted to stop the funding for Obamacare. Do you have any insight on that, Jack?
Yeah, the number 17. That's the number of seats that they have as a majority in the House, and the Republicans are scared to death of losing and being tagged with shutting down the government. And our comments to our congressman was, it's up to the Republicans to put the onus back on the Senate and the President, that the House is not voting to shut down the government. They're voting to stop some very bad legislation that's not good for America or Americans. And he agreed that that's what they need to do.
And we've seen this for several months now, that the Republicans are not voting to shut down the government. They're voting to defund Obamacare. And there is a strong support from citizens nationwide. But
very strong.
But yet the Republicans haven't made that argument.
No, they're scared.
Well, if they make the argument, then that gives them cover, but they're not making the argument. So that almost seems as if they are doing it or not making the argument so that they can they don't defund Obamacare, and so their hidden intention is, or hidden agenda is actually to pass it.
Yeah, of the leadership, not of the rank and file. I think there's a pretty good number in the caucus that do not want to do it. So
well,
I'm feeling confident that they might be able to defeat this thing.
Well, good. Well, it's because of programs like this and activities by those of you who in Washington add the force of your voice, and so that they see you firsthand and engage in that conversation, that all of us working together can make a difference, and we can. Christina, do you have a comment?
Well, I just would be interested in hearing from Jack. Who really is articulating best the arguments that we want to be hearing?
I can't find anybody that's really articulating it on the House side. I think Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, is doing a good job on the Senate side. But it just seems to be that no matter what they do and how they do it, they're not supposed to be opposed to the president's legislation.
Is that
it's very interesting?
That's the pulse in the House, you mean?
Well, no, that was more the pulse in the Senate.
That they're not supposed to be opposed to the president's legislation.
Yeah. Meadows is doing a good job of articulating in the House.
Yes. Well, how about the House leadership, Boehner and his leadership team?
They're not. They're in favor of passing it, and they're not providing the proper leadership that the American people would expect.
Well, on his leadership team is Tom Price from Georgia. Now, is he also supporting
Tom,
Boehner?
I think no. I don't think that he is supportive of the bill as it's presented.
Okay.
Jack,
I have not. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No. I interrupted you. Go aheed.
I've not had a chance to check and see how Price voted this afternoon.
Well, we'll all be looking to get the result of that vote, so we can identify those who stand up for us.
Yes. What was your question?
My question is, I'm sure you all are asking this question. Did you get to talk to anybody who is supporting the funding?
No, we did not get to talk to anybody that was supporting the funding.
Well, then there's no point in my asking my question, which is how do they justify voting to end Obamacare? What was it, 37 times?
Yeah, 41 times.
41 times. Well, yeah, they voted for it. And I tell you, every time they did, I was, yes, tell them. And then to turn tail and run when they have a chance to actually end it.
It's very difficult to understand.
Well, it's actually easy to understand because they're just full of hot air.
Well, okay, yeah, I'll agree with that.
Yeah, I think we used to call it NATO, no action, talk only.
Amen.
Well, Christina, you made a point that I was going to make, but let me add to that. We continually elect those who tell us how strong they are going to be and how much they believe in the message that they, the stunt speech they give to us, but when they get up there, then they blend. So they never were sincere in the first place. And it reminds me of the flim-flam snake oil salesman who sells us a potion that never works, and all it does is enrich the advantage.
It's not what they say; it's what they do.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad you're there. I'm glad you're there, pointing a finger and pointing it out, and looking them in the eye. At least you're getting a chance to see the good guys and give them some moral support.
And that's what they need. They need support too. So, we feel that we were just as effective as citizens could be.
Well, Jack,
I don't think there's much else.
We appreciate, and I'm speaking for all of us supporting you here in Georgia, and you represent a lot of folks here who couldn't be on the trip, and our hearts and our prayers are with you, and that you're effective, and the people up there willing to change their hearts, those who are not fully committed, to vote the right way to help us all. To help our nation. So we owe you a debt of gratitude, Jack, for forming this trip and pulling everybody together.
Well, we appreciate it. We're glad to do it.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank Jack.
You. Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Christina?
That's heartening, isn't it?
Yes, it is. On one hand, and you ask an excellent question.
I took it right out of your mouth, so of course it was an excellent question.
all the Republicans who have been voting to repeal Obamacare, and they've been voting unanimously, all of a sudden when it comes time to defund it, they're frightened that someone will say that they're in favor of shutting down the government, when all they have to say is that we're not shutting down the government, we're defunding Obamacare. And the American people want us to defund it and get that message out loud and strong every day on all the networks, but they're not doing it. So it makes me question their motive.
I'm not sure that I'm not sure about any of them really wanting Obamacare, but what they don't want is blame. They don't want to be blamed. And as soon as there is responsibility tied to a vote, suddenly, it disappears. And it reminds me of Democrats. How often have Democrats said they are opposed to the Vietnam War, the war in Nicaragua, but that's not a good example. The war in Kosovo, the Iraq. The Persian Gulf Wars. They're opposed to those wars, but they vote to fund them, right?
Every year they vote to fund
them. So they don't have the courage of their conviction, or they don't have the conviction that they claim to have courage for. And that's the question you're raising. Were they really sincere in those first votes, or are they really sincere now? But you really can't be sincere about both. You can't vote for one thing and against funding it. You can't vote against something and then vote in favor funding it. You know, whether you're talking about Democrats and war or you're talking about Republicans and health care.
And a person can't change their convictions, their precious, their heartfelt convictions. I mean, how many convictions have you ever changed in your life on a whim? And because someone said, Christina, you need to change this personal conviction that you have. I can't think of a time that's ever happened to me.
Well, Michael, that's only because I've never been elected.
So once you get elected, then you pass.
You develop that ability. They teach you that in congressional orientation school. Remember Rush Limbaugh warning the freshmen, the 74, 75 new Republican freshmen in 1994.
Yeah.
You know, not to drink the Kool-Aid. You know, they're gonna flatter you. You remember that?
Yeah. Yes, I do. But, you can change someone's intellectual mind, or if they don't have an intellectual mind and they're moldable as clay, so that they're only saying what they need to say in order to get elected. It doesn't matter to them what side of the fence they come down on as they look to see how it's going to affect the voters or how the voters are going to hold them accountable. And if they're not going to hold them accountable, then how they vote is a person. I don't want to say a person.
Are you saying, what difference does it make?
I guess I am, Christina. What difference does it make? They're not going to hold me accountable. They'll forget about it. And this is good for my career within the Congress, because then I'll get to be appointed head of a committee or a vice chair of a committee. And I will grow in importance, and that then reflects my speeches back to the constituents that you have to reelect me because I'm now vice chair of this committee or chair of that committee.
Well, and don't forget the goodies that you can get for your constituents.
That's right. And I guess it all comes back to the constituents again. We elect people who want to bring home some gifts to us, and that's the only gift I want from a congressman or a senator is the gift of good government.
Good government. That's supposed to be the unifying, and in fact, that's the only way that this system works. And if you read the Federalist Papers, that's what Madison says in Federalist 10 and Federalist 51, that it is the ability of ordinary Americans to agree on good government, even if they belong to hundreds of thousands of different interest groups. All of those interest groups check each other, and the one thing we can agree on is good government.
Yes, and I like to remind people that we, the citizens, are the government in this country, and that makes us.
We're the sovereign. We're the sovereigns.
We hire these people.
We hire the government.
That's right. We hire the people who run the bureaucracies. They all report to us, and we forget it. So at these town hall meetings, I heard John McCain say the other night, if you want to talk to me, be respectful. And the other person should have shot back, when you want to talk to us, you be respectful and you listen to us because we're the ones who hired you, and don't forget it. And speaking of John McCain, he's in the news in Arizona as they are mounting a potential recall campaign against John McCain. And
wouldn't that be something?
Wouldn't that? And James Strawn, who I mentioned earlier, is now joining us, and he's going to talk about recall and John McCain and what's happening in Arizona and whether or not recall elections are, should I call them recall elections, Christina?
Sure, they're recall elections.
Recall elections are something that the states need to be doing more of because, after all, the states created the federal government, and the 10th Amendment says all the powers not enumerated to the federal government, there are about 17 of those, are the rights of the states, and the states have abdicated that over the past 100-plus years. James?
Or the people.
Or the people.
Belong to the states or the people.
That's right. James?
Yes, Michael. Good evening. Good evening, Christina.
Hello, James.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It has been an interesting week, and I was interested to hear about your opinion on Mr. McCain because it seems to be fairly widely held at this point. So it seems this week the opinions on Syria have solidified, not just in the U.S., but it seems across the globe. In the U.S., the citizenry seems dead set against the war in Syria, and Mr. McCain has heard that on a number of occasions now, particularly in some his town halls with his constituents in Arizona. So I'm certain that the two of you and likely many in the audience have had an opportunity to catch some of the press coverage and the television coverage of the attacks Mr. McCain sustained on his position in Syria.
For the people though who may not be familiar specifically, there are a lot of folks out there who are just so busy working and taking care of their families that sometimes it's hard to catch the news. And a lot of this is breaking news, especially with what's happening in Arizona and the potential recall. If you could provide a little bit of background on that, James, we'd all appreciate it.
Well, the recall itself is really at this point just a social media phenomena, and so as you know, one of our specialties at Deciding the Vote is tracking social media, and so what we're seeing right now is a phenomenon, the Twitterverse, if you will, which is a hashtag Recall McCain campaign that's ongoing.
For the non-technical, what do you mean by hashtag?
Well, it's the pound sign, and then Recall McCain is what you would see in Twitter if you went to your Twitter account, or if you received something that had been retweeted from someone and you saw the pound Recall McCain. That would be referring to this populist uprising on the social media, and so the question is, will that gain some real impetus, and will they take and move that from a social media phenomena to a real legal phenomena, or a real call for a recall in Arizona? And Michael, you pointed out something earlier to me today which was interesting, and I had forgotten, which is the recall vote that's underway in Colorado now. So the Southwest seems to be heating up. And Mr. McCain, I think, needs to be worried about that.
Since you mentioned that, just a little bit of background on that. Colorado voted in very, very strict gun control laws, and it was supported by the governor and a couple of senators who really advocated controlling guns and the size of magazine clips. And the good citizens in Colorado, especially those in northern Colorado, more conservative part of the state, have become very, very upset that they're even starting a secession movement to become part of, I believe, Montana. I don't know how that's going to succeed, but it started in the social media. So these things that do start in the social media, as you mentioned in Arizona, they can sometimes come to fruition. But please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. As I was saying, I think John McCain has a little something to worry about here, because as with Colorado, Arizona is one of the states that has already passed legislation that allows for a recall vote, and so I think that's a reason for him to worry. I would say if you were to go across America, not speaking of Arizona specifically, but I think that many Americans, and many Americans I know at any rate, would be happy for Arizona to call home their favorite son there with Mr. McCain. So that's something that it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. As far as recalls themselves, that is one of the ways. The other way that Mr. McCain might be removed from office would be at the behest of the Senate itself. But if you look at the history there, in over the last 200 years, only 15 senators have been expelled from the Senate after, of the hundreds that have served. So it's unlikely that the Senate itself, particularly given Mr. McCain's tenure there, would look to do that type of thing, absent some other event that we don't see at this point in time. So I think the recall is the most likely way that would occur. Today there are 18 states that have on their books the possibility of recall. Arizona and Colorado, interestingly, are two of the states that allow for a recall basically without cause, because they don't like you, I guess would be a reason enough for a recall. But again, it's important to note that no recall petition has been successful to my knowledge. But maybe Colorado will be the first, and if Colorado's the first, maybe Arizona would be the second. So it'll be interesting to see where this thing goes. So,
well,
can a political scientist weigh in here?
Please,
by all means, Christina.
I don't think they can recall federal officials.
Doesn't it depend on the state law?
Well, I'm looking up right now, and Arizona is a recall state. They do have provisions for recall, but
because there is no.
There are in what I have found, New Jersey has a provision for recalling officials in the state or representing the state in the U.S. Congress.
Yeah,
that's the only state I see where that provision exists. It doesn't exist at least on this website, which is from the National Council of State Legislatures.
That's interesting. That's somewhat at odds with some of what I read earlier today, which seemed to indicate, and I think this was actually from the Senate.gov historical site, that seemed to indicate that there had been recall.
Maybe in the past.
In the past, and as I said, none have been successful, and I know that some have gone at least in front of state Supreme Courts and been dismissed at that level. So,
well, it may also have been found unconstitutional. Wait a second, I'm going to ask this other political scientist here. What do you know about recall of federal officials? He says there is none. That settles it. Under federal law, of course, there isn't under federal law, but under state law.
Right, but understanding that this is not addressed in the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights were passed reserving the 9th and 10th Amendment to the everything not covered in the Constitution is reserved to the states. So that makes it very clear to me, if it's not addressed in the Constitution, then the power is reserved to the states.
Apparently, it is possible for states to do this because New Jersey has such a provision, but it is the only one I see in it. I'm sorry, it's not the National Council, it's the National Conference of State Legislatures.
Well, as state sovereignty becomes more and more of an issue, and it is, it's coming back, and as folks become knowledgeable of state sovereignty and what that really means. The ruling by Chief Justice John Roberts on the Affordable Health Care Act, he made a statement that's worthy of notation, and it states that essentially Congress does not have the right to tell the states what to do. So let me see if I can, and this is on spending clause. It says our cases have recognized the limits on Congress's power under the spending clause to secure state compliance with federal objectives. And it says the respecting the limitation is critical to ensuring that spending clause legislation does not undermine the legal status of the states as independent sovereigns in our federal system. So here we're looking at a current law that was ruled on several months ago. And so we're not talking about a historical hypothetical here, But states are independent sovereigns, and the states ratified the Constitution, and the states created the federal government. And, you know, it only takes 38 states under Article 5 to amend the Constitution, and that's not signed off by the governor of each state, nor is it signed off by the president or the Congress. The states can do this themselves. So when we have 3/4 of the states, that would be 38. There's a lot of power there, and more states are coming to terms with that. Christina?
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay. James, do you have any comment?
Well, actually, I do. I mean, I think, Michael, you make a strong case for the essential dynamic that I understood, which is that, as Christina rightly noted, New Jersey specifically allows for impeaching congressmen and senators. I'm not certain. I certainly haven't read the state code for each of the 18 states that potentially could do this. I know that Kansas specifically does exempt national office holders, but I'm not at all sure about the other states.
I don't believe Georgia. I don't believe Georgia has that.
Okay.
And most of the southern states don't have recall provisions because we're heavily legislative-dominated states, and traditionally, and they don't want to be recalled.
And
James, I'm sorry, I talked over the point that you were making, so please.
No, I think that it is whatever the exact legal framing is at this point in time. I would say that this is something that is likely to receive press in the future and probably receive more treatment in the courts in the future, particularly given the circumstance that's occurring in Colorado right now. So.
Here's a way that maybe you can do a recall without explicit language. There are, I think, that most of the states that have recall provisions have you can petition and get something on the ballot. Maybe that something could be a recall resolution.
And that's a good point, Christina. But here in Georgia, we do not have the right of petition, so we.
Oh no, in Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, you don't have recall, initiative, or petition. Those are largely confined to the western states.
Referendum, that's right. And as we, the people, become more aware that those whom we have elected do not always honestly represent us and what we seek to achieve, we need to have the people need to have a greater voice in government at all levels. I'm reminded that the founders of the Constitution put in place protections. The House of Representatives, it was known as the People's House, the voice of the people. We have elections every 2 years. But the Senate was supposed to be the representative of the states, that the state legislators chose the senators. And so they represented the power of the states in our federal system, and that's the basis and the heartbeat of federalism. So when Woodrow Wilson and I believe the 17th Amendment passed in 1913, about the same time as the income tax had passed. It's funny, two constitutional amendments passing so closely to each other, but they took away the power of the states, and because of that, thereafter, we've had this kind of group in Washington, group of senators in Washington who have been exposed to corruption by money and intent, and if the states were represented, most certainly if the senator were getting a lot of money under the table, he would be recalled by the state legislature. So there's a movement afoot, too, to repeal the 17th Amendment.
Well, unless he was sharing the money with them.
Yeah, there's a lot of jealousy that goes on. They'd have to share the money with too many folks. So
I hate to be so cynical. There's one other problem with recall. Even there's a couple of problems. One is that no recall effort of a federal official has ever succeeded. But if, let's say, New Jersey was to recall one of their senators, the next challenge would be at the Supreme Court, because in U.S. Term Limits v. Thornton, that was an Arkansas case in 1995 in which term limits was thrown out, the court said that by putting a restriction, by writing a law that restricted individuals to a certain number of terms, their names could not appear on the ballot after, I think it was 6 times in the House and 3 times in the Senate, for Senate. They could run as a write-in, but they couldn't get on the ballot. That was the ballot access question.
Sure.
The court said, no, Arkansas can't do that. Only Congress can determine, things that have to do with congressional elections.
Well, actually, I think it goes beyond Congress because it is written in the Constitution that they can serve, and there are no limits on that. So, in order to put a limit on it, it would have to be a constitutional.
Yeah. So it's similar to a recall, because a recall is interfering with an election. The election's taken place. The person has won. It's a stretch, but they're into stretching up there at the Supreme Court.
If they can't stretch to do it, then they'll just arbitrarily do it, much like we see what's happening.
Change the law into words that you can rule on and get the result you want.
George Orwell predicted that very well in 1984. War is peace, peace is war, and
fines are taxes, taxes are fines.
That's right. As John Roberts said, you can't fine somebody for not buying Obamacare.
But you can tax them.
You can tax them, and if they don't pay their taxes, then they are subject to the discipline of
then
the
you
law
can fine them.
That's right. Well, what a note to end the show on. I can't tell you how much I appreciate having conversations, James, with both you and Christina. Y'all are remarkable people, and hopefully the audience has gotten something out of our discussion, and we will be back next week. We hope that you found the show to be both informative and interesting. Please tell your friends about the show and where to find us, because if we are to turn our country around, it will take all of us working together. My email address is mopitz@mindspring.com. Remember, knowledge is power.
MOPITZ.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. Do it again.
MOPITZ @mindspring.com.
Right. And, James, to mention your website again, if you would.
Deciding the Vote, and just like it says.
.com.
.com, yes, decidingthevote.com.
So please go there and explore. Christina, do you have a website that you would like to promote?
No, I'm just a free American.
Okay, and we're glad that you are free. So anyway, remember, knowledge is power and ignorance is slavery. This is Michael Opitz wishing you a blessed day. Goodbye now.